So my name is Sarah Newberry. I'm a family physician here in Marathon and Chief of Staff of North of Superior Healthcare Group. We wanted to find some ways of making social distancing and self-isolation make sense for our population, and we thought part of the way that we could do that is share the numbers with you. We also want to make sure that the community of Marathon understands the reason for the declaration of state of emergency by the municipality yesterday. Before I launch into this, I want to acknowledge this is take 2 of an earlier video, and I'm grateful to my trusty sidekick, Emily Bruce, who is doing the video today. So let's start with what our real population numbers are and a little bit about what we know about COVID-19. So we know that in the community of Marathon, at our clinic, the only clinic in the community, we have just over 4,400 active charts. We know, and we'll post some references for you in association with this video, that over time it's possible that somewhere between 30 to 70% of the Canadian population could be infected with COVID-19 if we don't take aggressive measures to self-isolate and to practice social or physical distancing. This is really important because we know of the portion of people that become infected, 5% will require hospitalization, and many of those people will require intensive care and ventilation support. So I want to come back to the concept of physical distancing and self-isolation to help you understand why there is a real sense of urgency around these couple of weeks and weeks beyond, actually moving into the future. So you've heard the concept of flattening the curve. What I want to share with you is this idea of exponential growth in the setting of an epidemic or pandemic. So we start with one person who has an illness. We know in COVID-19 that in general, every person with COVID-19 will infect somewhere between 2.3 and 2.6 people. So that's an average. It doesn't mean that they infect every person they come in contact with, but it does mean that on average, people who have the illness of COVID-19 as they circulate in the public and come into contact with people will on average infect 2.3 to 2.6 other people. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to say they infect 2 people. We're going to use an incubation period of 5 days plus a little bit to give you a sense of the time for this. So we'll start with person number 1 who has COVID-19. Let's say they've just returned from a trip away that was started in the fall and they've come back to the community now in the midst of this pandemic. So that person maybe doesn't identify their symptoms. They go on to infect 2 people. Those 2 people go on to infect 2 more people each. And now we have 4 people infected in 14 days. Each of those people also infects 2 people. Now we have 8 people infected at 21 days. Each of them infects 2 people. And then we have 16 people at 28 days. Those numbers double every 7 days. So we go from 16 to 32 to 64 to 128, 256, all the way out to 4,000, just basically the number of people that we have in the community that we serve as a healthcare system. So 4,000 people at around day 84, or 3 months from now. That is what could happen if we do nothing with self-isolation and social distancing. Here's why it matters from a healthcare standpoint. So if we take these numbers of 30 to 70% of the population becoming infected, so we have just over, we'll call it 4,000 charts. 30% of that population becoming infected means 1,200 people. 5% of that population, which is the number that typically require hospitalization, means 60 people requiring hospitalization in a worst case scenario where 70% of the population is infected. That's 2,800 people. And that translates into roughly 140 people being hospitalized, and a significant portion of each of those groups would go on to require ICU or ventilation. We have 10 acute care beds in our hospital, and the idea of needing to hospitalize 60 people for a couple of weeks each over the next 3 months is really overwhelming. This number is actually almost unthinkable. But there is something that we can do, and this is the purpose of self-isolation and social distancing. So with self-isolation and social distancing, we take this first person on day 1. Again, they have symptoms. They go on to infect 2 people, and each of them doesn't practice isolation or social distancing, and they go on to each infect 2 people. But these people, some of them, have got the message. And these 3 go into self-isolation, and they stay in self-isolation until their symptoms are completely gone. They don't transmit the virus. This person didn't practice self-isolation and goes on to infect 2 more people. This person doesn't practice self-isolation, infects 2 more. This person does practice self-isolation. We're back to having just 2 people at day 35, not the high numbers that we were seeing previously. The more people who self-isolate, the faster the virus is brought down in the community, and the much more easily we will be able to manage the COVID-19 epidemic within the community. So let's look at the idea of flattening the curve. So think back to the portion that I erased of people rapidly transmitting the virus, every person transmitting to 2 other people every 7 days. We know that that creates a huge wave of people over 90 days. That's a huge and unmanageable volume of people becoming sick at the same time. But if we practice self-isolation when we're returning from areas of high risk or when we have symptoms ourselves, then as you saw from that last image, fewer people become infected. And that curve stretches out over time. From a healthcare system standpoint, what we want to do is keep the demand below our capacity to deliver care. So we can manage those people who become infected with COVID as long as it's stretched out over time and fits within our capacity. And I feel really confident that we can do that we can manage our population with COVID-19 at the same time as we continue to provide care for all of the people who have things emerge that are just everyday things. Heart attacks, strokes, delivering babies, slipping and falling and breaking a hip. All of those things will continue to happen even in this COVID-19 era. And we need to be able to manage people who become ill with COVID-19 at the same time as we continue to deliver care. So how are we going to do that? People who have traveled abroad and people with symptoms need to self-isolate. If you've traveled, it needs to be for a minimum of 14 days, and if you have symptoms, it needs to be until your symptoms have resolved and you've checked back in with a healthcare provider. We need to practice social and physical distancing, even if we don't have symptoms, because we are coming to understand that the virus can be transmitted asymptomatically, so even by people who don't yet have symptoms. We absolutely need to protect the vulnerable, because although we've said that 5% of people will require hospitalization, by far the majority of those are people over the age of 50 and even greater over the age of 70 and 80. If we can protect our vulnerable population, our people who live in chronic care, our people who live in supportive housing, our seniors who live independently at home, then we will help them to stay healthy through this period of time, and we will decrease the requirement for hospitalization, intensive care, and ventilation. We can flatten the curve. We can keep our hospitalizations to a minimum. We can continue to provide the care that we need to provide to the whole of our population, but we can't do it alone, and we need every citizen to be an everyday hero and isolate themselves if they're sick, distance themselves all the time at this point in our history, until this pandemic is passing. And I know that we can all do that. I don't want you to post comments about liking this video. I want you to post comments about how this information will change what you are going to do, and I'll look forward to reading what you write. Thanks so much.